I don't want them to fight because of me again. A 6-year-old blamed herself for everything, until a stranger stopped and listened. The girl's voice was so quiet that Ethan almost missed it, swallowed by the distant noise of traffic and the low hum of the shopping center behind them. He would have walked past if the words hadn't carried something heavier than sound, something that made him stop without fully understanding why. I don't want them to fight because of me again. She was sitting on a cold metal bench near the entrance, her small body folded inward as if trying to take up less space in the world. The yellow dress she wore looked carefully chosen, too neat for a child who spent time waiting outside, its brightness strangely out of place against her tense posture. Her blonde hair fell loosely over her shoulders, and her blue eyes were fixed on the ground, as though looking up might somehow make things worse. Ethan turned toward her slowly. He was used to urgency, to problems announced loudly and demands made without hesitation. This was different. This was a sentence that had clearly been repeated in her head many times before she ever said it out loud. What do you mean? He asked gently, keeping his distance. The girl flinched at the sound of his voice, then glanced up at him briefly, her eyes darting away almost immediately. If I wasn't here, she said, choosing each word with care, they wouldn't yell. Ethan felt a sharp pull in his chest, an instinctive reaction he hadn't experienced in years. He glanced around, half expecting to see anxious parents nearby, but the area was strangely empty. Cars moved in and out of the parking lot, people passed without noticing her, without noticing how small she looked sitting there alone. Who are they? He asked. My mom and dad, she replied. They always get mad when I talk. Or when I don't talk. Or when I do something wrong. Or when I try to help. Her voice remained calm, almost factual, as if she were explaining a rule she had memorized. Ethan sat down on the bench a short distance away, careful not to crowd her, careful not to rush. What's your name? He asked. Mia. That's a nice name, he said. How old are you, Mia? 6, she answered. Almost 7. Ethan nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of that number. 6 years old, and already carrying explanations for adult emotions she had no control over. Where are your parents right now? He asked. Mia hesitated, then pointed toward the parking lot without lifting her arm fully. In the car. They told me to wait here until they're done. Done with what? With fighting, she said quietly. They fight less when I'm not there. The words landed hard, settling into Ethan's thoughts like something fragile that had been dropped and not yet broken. He followed her gaze toward the lot and spotted a car with 2 figures inside, their movements sharp and animated even through the glass. Neither of them looked toward the entrance. Neither of them seemed to notice the child waiting alone on the bench. How long have you been waiting? He asked. I don't know, Mia said. Long enough that my legs stopped shaking. Ethan leaned back slightly, his mind racing in a direction he hadn't planned on going today. He had meetings, deadlines, calls he was supposed to return. None of it felt relevant anymore. Mia, he said carefully, did someone tell you that you're the reason they fight? She shrugged, her shoulders rising and falling in a small, practiced motion. They say my name a lot when they're angry. So it must be true. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not a dramatic child or a scene waiting to happen, but a little girl who had quietly rewritten reality to survive it. He felt something shift inside him, a firm and unmistakable refusal to let this moment pass unnoticed. That's not how it works, he said softly. Adults don't fight because of children. Mia frowned slightly, confused but listening. Then why do they say it? Ethan didn't answer right away. Some truths required time, and some required witnesses. He glanced once more at the car in the parking lot, then back at the girl in the yellow dress who believed she was the problem. He understood then that whatever happened next, he could not simply walk away. Not anymore. Mia shifted on the bench, her feet barely touching the ground, the toes of her shoes scuffing the pavement in a slow, nervous rhythm. Ethan noticed how she kept glancing toward the parking lot, not with hope, but with the wary attention of someone listening for danger. It was the look of a child who had learned to monitor adults the way others watched the weather. "They don't mean it all the time," she said suddenly, as if continuing a thought she had been carrying alone. "Only when they're really loud. When they're quiet, it's worse, because then I don't know if I should talk or not." Ethan leaned back slightly, resting his hands on his knees, careful to keep his posture open and calm. He didn't interrupt her. He sensed that once she started speaking, stopping her would feel like closing a door she had just barely pushed open. "When they're loud, I know I should be quiet," Mia continued. "When they're quiet, I try to make them laugh, but sometimes that makes it worse too. So I think maybe it's better if I'm not there at all." The sentence was delivered without drama, without tears, like a conclusion reached after many nights of careful thought. Ethan felt the weight of it settle in his chest, heavy and unmoving. He had negotiated contracts worth millions, had stared down hostile boardrooms and impossible deadlines, but nothing had ever made him feel this powerless. "That's a lot to carry," he said gently. "Especially for someone your age." Mia shrugged again, the motion automatic. "I'm used to it." Ethan didn't like how easily she said that. He followed her gaze once more to the car. The argument inside seemed to be escalating, hands waving, heads turning sharply away from each other. Still, neither adult looked toward the entrance. "They told you to wait here," Ethan said. "Did they say how long?" Mia shook her head. "They never do. Sometimes I count cars instead." "How many have you counted today?" 23, she answered immediately. "Red ones count double." Despite himself, Ethan felt a faint, painful smile tug at the corner of his mouth. Children adapted in ways adults rarely noticed, building small systems to survive big emotions. "Mia," he said after a pause, "do you know what adults argue about?" She frowned slightly. "Money. Work. Me." Ethan exhaled slowly. "Adults argue about money and work a lot," he said. "But that doesn't mean it's your fault." She looked at him skeptically, her blue eyes sharp. "Then why do they stop when I leave?" The question was quiet but relentless. Ethan considered his answer carefully, knowing that empty reassurance would do more harm than good. "Sometimes adults don't know how to control themselves," he said. "And when a child is there, they either try to stop and fail, or they blame the child because it's easier than blaming themselves." Mia processed this in silence, her fingers twisting the hem of her yellow dress. "So they're wrong?" she asked finally. "Yes," Ethan said without hesitation. "They're wrong about that." The certainty in his voice made her look up again, really look at him, as if searching for cracks. She had learned not to trust confidence easily. "If I believe you," she said slowly, "and you're wrong, then it's my fault for believing you." The word struck him harder than anything else she had said so far. He realized then that Mia didn't just blame herself for their fights, she blamed herself for the risk of hoping otherwise. "I won't let that happen," Ethan replied. "If I'm wrong, that's on me." She studied his face for a long moment. Then she nodded, not fully convinced, but willing to place a small amount of weight on his words. A sharp laugh erupted from the car in the parking lot, followed by raised voices. Mia flinched, her shoulders tightening, her eyes dropping instantly to the ground. Ethan stood up. "Stay here," he said softly. I'm not leaving. He took a few steps toward the parking lot, then stopped and looked back at her. You're not the reason, he added, slower this time. I promise. Mia hugged her arms around herself, watching him walk away. For the first time, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't know yet what would happen next, or whether anyone would change. But someone had listened. And that, already, was different. Ethan crossed the distance to the parking lot slowly, not with the anger that surged in his chest, but with the restraint of someone who understood that escalation would only deepen the damage already done. The cold asphalt crunched beneath his shoes as he approached the car, its engine still running, exhaust curling into the air like visible breath. Inside, the man and woman were locked in their argument, faces tight, voices sharp enough to cut through the glass. He stopped a few feet from the driver's side and waited until they noticed him. It took longer than it should have. When the man finally looked up, irritation flashed across his face, quickly followed by confusion. Is there a problem? The man asked through the cracked window, his tone already defensive. Yes, Ethan said calmly. Your daughter is sitting alone outside, convinced she's the reason you're fighting. The words landed like a sudden drop in temperature. The woman turned sharply, her expression shifting from anger to alarm. Mia, she said. She's right there. We told her to wait. Ethan held her gaze. She's 6, he replied. And she thinks your marriage problems are her fault. Silence filled the car, thick and uncomfortable. The man scoffed quietly. That's ridiculous, he muttered. We don't say that. You say her name, Ethan replied evenly. And children fill in the rest. The woman's face paled. She looked past Ethan, toward the bench by the entrance, where Mia still sat, small and folded inward, watching without looking like she was watching. She's always been sensitive, the woman said weakly. No, Ethan said. She's been paying attention. The man opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, his jaw tightening. This isn't your business, he said finally. Ethan nodded once. You're right. But she is. He stepped back without another word and returned to the bench. Mia looked up immediately, her eyes searching his face for answers he hadn't spoken yet. He sat down beside her again, close enough now that she could feel his presence without shrinking away. They're still mad, she said quietly, not accusing, just observing. They are, Ethan agreed. But not at you. She hesitated. Did you tell them? Yes, he said. I told them exactly what you told me. Mia swallowed. Are they angry at me now? Ethan turned toward her fully. No, he said. They're uncomfortable. That's different. She frowned, trying to understand. Uncomfortable like when you sit too long. Like when you realize you hurt someone and can't pretend you didn't, Ethan replied. Mia was quiet for a long moment. The noise of the parking lot faded into the background as she stared at her hands, twisting the fabric of her dress between her fingers. What if they forget again? She asked. They always do. The question was not hypothetical. It was lived in, worn smooth by repetition. Ethan felt the truth of it settle heavily between them. Then it won't be your job to remind them, he said. It will be theirs. She looked up at him sharply. Grown-ups don't like being reminded. No, Ethan admitted. But that doesn't make it your responsibility. Mia leaned back against the bench, her shoulders sagging slightly as if she had been holding herself upright for too long. Sometimes I pretend I'm not there, she said. Then they talk nicer. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, the image cutting too close. You shouldn't have to disappear to be loved, he said softly. Footsteps approached. The woman was walking toward them now, her movements slower, more deliberate, her face strained with something that looked like fear. She stopped a few feet away, unsure whether to come closer. Mia, she said, her voice gentler than before. Sweetheart, I didn't know you felt that way. Mia looked at her mother but did not move. I don't want you to fight, she said simply. The woman crouched down, her breath catching. We're not fighting because of you, she said. We never were. Mia glanced at Ethan, uncertainty flickering across her face. He met her eyes and nodded once, steady and sure. Sometimes adults say things they don't mean, the woman continued, tears forming now. And sometimes they don't realize how loud those things sound. Mia considered this carefully. Will you stop saying my name when you're mad? She asked. The question was small, precise, impossible to dodge. The woman nodded quickly. Yes, she said. I promise. Mia did not smile. Not yet. Promises had weight only when time proved them true. She simply sat there, absorbing the moment, the shift in the air, the fact that her thoughts had been spoken aloud and not dismissed. Ethan watched quietly, aware that his role here was not to fix or to rescue, but to witness. To make sure this moment did not vanish as easily as so many others had. As the woman reached out and gently took Mia's hand, Ethan felt a cautious hope take root. It was fragile, easily broken, but real. And for the first time, Mia did not pull away. The moment did not resolve itself as neatly as anyone might have hoped. Mia's mother stayed crouched in front of her, still holding her hand, as if afraid that letting go would undo everything that had just been said. The father remained by the car, watching from a distance, his posture rigid, his face turned slightly away. The air between all of them felt stretched thin, like a surface that might crack if pressed too hard. Mia sat very still. She did not lean into her mother, but she did not pull away either. Her eyes moved carefully from face to face, measuring tones, pauses, breaths. She had learned that change was not proven by words alone, but by what followed them. Can we go home now? Her mother asked softly. Mia hesitated. Home was not a place anymore. It was a condition. She looked up at Ethan instead, not seeking permission, but grounding herself in the presence of someone who had listened without asking her to be smaller. Ethan met her gaze and gave a slight nod, the kind that said whatever she chose would be respected. I don't want to go back to the car, Mia said after a moment. Not right now. Her mother swallowed hard. Okay, she replied, forcing calm into her voice. That's okay. We can walk. The father approached slowly then, his movements awkward, uncertain. He stopped a few steps away from them, clearly unsure of his place in the moment. I didn't mean it like that, he said, his voice rough. I didn't mean to make you think. Mia looked at him directly. When you shout my name, she said, it feels like it's my fault. The words were simple, but they landed with undeniable weight. The man's shoulders slumped slightly, as if something inside him had finally given way. I didn't know, he said quietly. Mia nodded once. Now you do. No one spoke for a while after that. Cars continued to move through the parking lot, people passed in and out of the shopping center, unaware that something fragile and important was unfolding just a few feet away. Ethan remained seated, silent, present, understanding that his restraint mattered as much as his earlier intervention. They began walking slowly toward the building entrance, not in a tight group, but together enough to feel connected. Mia stayed between her parents, not holding either hand, but close enough to touch if she chose. Her steps were cautious, her body still prepared to retreat at the first sign of raised voices. Inside, they stopped near the bench where everything had begun. Mia looked at it for a moment, then climbed onto it again, smoothing her dress beneath her. "This is where I wait," she said, not accusing, just stating a fact. Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "You shouldn't have to," she whispered. Mia looked at her steadily. "I don't want to wait anymore." Ethan stood slowly, his presence drawing their attention back to him. "Waiting doesn't fix arguments," he said calmly. "It just teaches children how to disappear." The father nodded, shame flickering across his face. "We need help," he admitted. "We've been pretending we don't." The admission hung in the air, uncomfortable but necessary. Mia listened closely, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction. She didn't need perfection. She needed effort that didn't vanish the moment things got difficult. Her mother reached for her again, this time more carefully. "We're going to try," she said. "Not just say it. Try." Mia didn't respond right away. She slid off the bench and stood there, small but steady. Then, slowly, she placed her hand in her mother's. "I'll watch," she said. Ethan felt something tighten and ease inside him at the same time. He knew this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning, and beginnings were messy, uncertain, and often fragile. As they prepared to leave together, Mia turned back toward him. "Thank you for hearing me," she said. He nodded. "Thank you for telling the truth." They walked away then, the three of them moving forward not with confidence, but with awareness. Ethan watched until they disappeared from view, knowing that he might never see them again. But he also knew that something had shifted. A child had been heard. And that, sometimes, was enough to change the direction of a life. The days that followed did not transform everything at once, but they carried a different weight, as if the ground beneath Mia's feet had shifted just enough for her to notice. She still woke up early, still listened carefully for raised voices, still measured the mood in the room before deciding where to sit or whether to speak. But now there was a new awareness layered over the old habits, a quiet understanding that her thoughts had been heard once, and could be heard again. At home, the changes were small and awkward. Her parents moved around each other cautiously, like people relearning a language they had forgotten how to speak. Arguments did not disappear, but when voices began to rise, they stopped themselves more often than not. Sometimes it was clumsy. Sometimes it was silent and tense. Sometimes it failed. But even in failure, something had changed. Mia was no longer sent away. The first time they argued in front of her after that day, Mia froze, her body reacting before her mind could catch up. She stood perfectly still, waiting for the familiar command to go to her room or wait somewhere else. It didn't come. Instead, her mother paused mid-sentence and took a breath. "Let's stop," she said quietly. "Not like this." The room fell silent. Mia's heart pounded as she waited for the sound of anger to return, but it didn't. The argument dissolved into discomfort, into unfinished words, into something unresolved but contained. Mia sat down slowly, unsure of what to do with the space that had opened up. Later that evening, her father knocked on her door. He stood there longer than necessary, his hand hovering near the frame. "I want to say something," he said. "And I don't want you to think you have to fix it." Mia listened without interrupting, her face carefully neutral. "When I get angry," he continued, "I say things because I don't know what else to do with it. That doesn't make them true. And it doesn't make them yours." She nodded, not because everything made sense, but because the effort itself mattered. Outside of home, Mia noticed herself changing too. At school, she raised her hand more often, even when she wasn't completely sure of the answer. When a classmate blamed her for a mistake during a group project, she felt the familiar pull of guilt rise in her chest, then pause. For the first time, she said, "That wasn't just me, and the world didn't end." Sometimes she thought about Ethan. Not constantly, not as a rescue story, but as a reference point. Someone who had stopped walking. Someone who had listened without trying to hurry her truth. She didn't know if she would ever see him again, but his presence lingered in a way that made her feel less alone in her own thoughts. One afternoon, weeks later, she saw him again by accident. He was standing near the same bench, talking on his phone, his posture familiar even from a distance. Mia stopped short, her breath catching. She watched him for a moment, unsure whether she should approach. He ended his call and turned, and when he saw her, his expression softened instantly. "Mia," he said, surprised but genuinely pleased. "Hi." She walked toward him slowly. "They're trying," she said without greeting. "Not always good. But trying." Ethan nodded, understanding more than the words alone conveyed. "That matters," he said. She hesitated, then added, "I don't wait on the bench anymore." He smiled, not broadly, but with quiet relief. "I'm glad." They stood there for a moment, the city moving around them, both aware that this meeting was not an obligation but a confirmation. Something that had started with a sentence whispered in fear had carried forward, changing shape as it went. As Mia walked away, she felt something she had rarely felt before. Not certainty. Not happiness in the simple sense. But space. Space to exist without explaining herself. Space to be a child without translating adult emotions. Space that had been opened not by a miracle, but by one moment of attention. And that space, she was learning, was where healing quietly began. Time moved forward in a way that felt unfamiliar to Mia, slower and less sharp around the edges. Days no longer blurred together as a series of moments to endure. Instead, they began to separate themselves, each one slightly different from the last, each one offering small evidence that not everything would collapse if she took up space. Her parents started attending counseling sessions together. At first, Mia wasn't told much about them, only that they were talking to someone. She noticed the changes anyway. The arguments became shorter. The silences became less dangerous. When voices rose, they were followed by pauses instead of explosions. Mia watched all of this closely, not with optimism, but with careful observation, as though she were studying a fragile experiment that might fail at any moment. One evening, her mother sat beside her on the couch and said, "If we ever start making you feel like it's your fault again, I want you to tell us." Mia looked at her, startled. "What if you get mad?" Her mother swallowed. "Then that will still be our responsibility, not yours." The words settled slowly. They didn't erase the past, but they gave it boundaries. At school, Mia's teacher noticed changes too. She stopped apologizing before asking questions. She stopped shrinking when corrected. Once, when a boy blamed her for spilling paint during art class, she felt the old instinct surge, the familiar urge to absorb the blame and keep the peace. Instead, she took a breath and said, "It was an accident. We both bumped the table." The teacher nodded, and the moment passed without punishment or tension. Mia sat back down, heart racing, surprised at herself. Some nights were still hard. Raised voices on television made her flinch. Sudden movements tightened her chest. But now, when those feelings came, she didn't assume they meant she had done something wrong. She named them quietly to herself. Fear. Memory. Habit. Naming them made them smaller. Ethan crossed her mind often, though not as a hero or a savior. He existed in her memory as proof. Proof that adults could stop. Proof that listening could change direction. Proof that someone could see her and not look away. One Saturday afternoon, her parents suggested they go to the park together. The idea alone made Mia nervous. Outings had always been unpredictable, often ending in tension or blame. She agreed anyway, her body stiff with readiness. At the park, something unexpected happened. Her parents sat on a bench and talked quietly while she played. They watched her instead of watching each other. When she ran back to them, breathless and smiling, no one told her to calm down or be careful or stop being so loud. They smiled back. Later, as they walked home, her father said, "You don't have to manage us." Mia stopped walking. "I never wanted to," she said honestly. He nodded. "I know. And I'm sorry you thought you had to." The apology was not perfect. It did not fix everything. But it was real, and it stayed. That night, Mia lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the ordinary sounds of the apartment. Dishes being put away. Water running. Footsteps moving without urgency. She realized she wasn't waiting for anything to go wrong. The absence of that constant vigilance felt strange, almost uncomfortable, like silence after a loud noise. She hugged her pillow and let herself imagine something new, something unfamiliar. A future where she didn't need to shrink to keep peace. Where love did not depend on her ability to disappear. She didn't know yet how to live in that future. But she had stepped into it. And for the first time, she believed she was allowed to stay. The real test did not arrive as a dramatic argument or a loud confrontation. It came quietly, wrapped in something that looked almost ordinary. One evening, after dinner, Mia's parents sat at the table longer than usual, their voices low, careful, serious. Mia was in the living room drawing, but her body recognized the shift immediately. Her shoulders tightened, her hand froze mid-stroke, and the familiar instinct rose inside her like a reflex she hadn't asked for. She stood up without thinking and walked toward the hallway, ready to remove herself before anyone had to ask. "Mia," her mother called gently. "You don't have to go." Mia stopped, her back still turned. Her heart was beating fast, louder than the words in the room. Slowly, she turned around. "We're just talking," her father added. "Not fighting." Mia watched them closely. Their faces were serious, but not sharp. Their voices were steady, not raised. Still, the feeling inside her didn't disappear right away. Fear didn't vanish just because it was no longer needed. She walked back to the couch and sat down, pulling her knees up, drawing without really seeing the page. She listened. Not for blame this time, but for tone, for pauses, for signs she needed to disappear. The conversation ended quietly. No slammed doors. No accusations. Just silence, and then her mother standing up to rinse a plate. Mia realized her breath had been held the entire time. She exhaled slowly, surprised by how much energy it took to stay present. Later that night, as her father tucked her in, she finally spoke. "I thought you were going to start," she admitted. He sat on the edge of the bed, not rushing to contradict her. "So did I," he said honestly. "That's why we stopped." She studied his face, searching for defensiveness, for excuses. She found none. "It still feels scary," she said. "I know," he replied. "And it might for a while. But you don't have to protect us anymore." Mia nodded, not because she fully believed it yet, but because she wanted to. A few days later, something else happened. At school, Mia was asked to perform in a small class presentation. Normally, she would have chosen a quiet role, something that didn't draw attention. This time, she volunteered to speak. When she stood in front of the class, her voice trembled at first, but she didn't stop. She didn't apologize. She finished. When the class applauded, something inside her shifted. It wasn't confidence exactly. It was permission. That afternoon, she told her parents about it. They listened. Really listened. They didn't interrupt. They didn't redirect the moment back to themselves. They were proud, and they said so without conditions. That night, Mia sat on her bed and thought about Ethan again. Not in the way she had before, as a memory tied to fear, but as a quiet presence connected to change. She realized something then that made her sit up straighter. He hadn't fixed her family. He hadn't saved her. He had simply stopped long enough to let her be heard. And because of that, everything else had started to move. Mia lay back down, staring at the ceiling, feeling something new settle into her chest. It wasn't certainty. It wasn't safety in its final form. It was trust, beginning to grow. Not just in her parents. Not just in adults. But in herself. The change became visible not in a single moment, but in a collection of ordinary days that no longer felt dangerous. Mia noticed it one afternoon when she came home from school and dropped her backpack by the door without bracing herself for what mood she might be walking into. The apartment sounded normal. Not quiet in a tense way, not loud in a warning way. Just lived in. Dishes clinked softly in the kitchen. Music played at a low volume. Someone laughed, then stopped, then laughed again. She stood there longer than necessary, surprised by how unfamiliar calm could feel. "Mia," her mother called. "Dinner in 10 minutes." Mia answered without rehearsing her tone. "Okay." The word came easily. It didn't feel like a test. Later that evening, they sat together at the table. Not perfectly. Not without pauses. But together. When her parents disagreed about something small, they spoke about it, then moved on. No one looked at Mia. No one waited for her reaction. For the first time, she was not the center of the storm or the shield against it. She was just a child eating dinner. Afterward, Mia went to her room and pulled out her drawings. The one she had made weeks ago caught her attention, the one with a small figure sitting alone on a bench. She studied it for a long time, then flipped the page and began a new one. This time, the bench was empty. The space around it was still there, but it no longer needed to hold anyone. A few days later, she passed the shopping center with her parents. As they walked by, Mia slowed down, her eyes drifting toward the familiar entrance. The bench was still there. People sat on it, checked their phones, waited for rides. It looked ordinary now. "Do you want to stop?" her father asked, noticing her hesitation. Mia shook her head. "No," she said. "I don't need to." They kept walking. That night, as she lay in bed, Mia thought about how she used to measure herself. How carefully she once listened for signs that she was too loud, too much, too present. How often she believed that love depended on her ability to disappear. The thought felt distant now, like remembering a room she no longer lived in. She still flinched sometimes. She still felt fear rise without warning. Healing hadn't erased those instincts. It had simply given them context. When fear appeared now, it no longer meant guilt. It meant memory. And memory could be held without obeying it. Mia turned onto her side and hugged her pillow, not out of loneliness, but out of comfort. She understood something she hadn't before. That the belief she had carried for so long was never hers to begin with. It had been placed on her quietly, repeatedly, until she mistook it for truth. Someone had interrupted that cycle. Not with grand speeches or rescue, but by stopping long enough to listen. Because of that, Mia no longer believed she was the reason everything broke. She believed she was allowed to exist fully, loudly, imperfectly, without apology. And that belief, once planted, began to grow into something steady and strong. Something that would stay with her long after the arguments faded. Something that would carry her forward. She closed her eyes and slept deeply, not because the world was perfect, but because for the first time, it no longer felt like it would fall apart if she stayed exactly where she was.